Before I call the Home Secretary to make a statement, I remind honourable members that they should not refer to any specific cases currently before the courts, and that they should exercise caution with respect to any specific cases that might subsequently come before the courts in order not to prejudice these proceedings. Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. With your permission, I will make a statement on the independent inquiry into grooming gangs, the appointment of its chair and panel, and the inquiry's terms of reference. I know that, for many, this day is long overdue. For years, the victims of these awful crimes were ignored. First abused by vile predators, they then found themselves belittled and even blamed when it was justice they were owed. In January, my predecessor asked Baroness Casey of Blackstock, who's here with us today, to conduct a national audit on group-based child sexual exploitation and abuse. With devastating clarity, Baroness Casey revealed the horror that lies behind that jargonistic term. It is vital that we too call these crimes what they were: multiple sexual assaults committed by multiple men on multiple occasions. Children were submitted to beatings and gang rapes. Many contracted sexually transmitted infections. Some were forced to have abortions. Others had their children taken from them. But it was not just these awful crimes that now shame us. There was also an abject failure by the state in its many forms to fulfil its most basic duty: protecting the young and vulnerable. Worse still, some in positions of power turned a blind eye to the horror, even covered it up. Despite a shameful lack of national data, Baroness Casey was clear that in some local areas where data was available, and I quote, disproportionate numbers of men from Asian ethnic backgrounds were amongst the suspects. Like every member of my community who I know, I am horrified by these acts. We must root out this evil once and for all. The sickening acts of a minority of evil men, as well as those in positions of authority who look the other way, must not be allowed to marginalise or demonise entire communities of law-abiding citizens. What is required now is a moment of reckoning. We must cast fresh light on this darkness. In her audit, Baroness Casey called for a national inquiry. In June, the government accepted that recommendation. And today, I can announce the chair and panel that will form the leadership of the inquiry and a draft of the inquiry's terms of reference. The inquiry will be chaired by Baroness Anne Longfield. As many in this place will know, Baroness Longfield was the Children's Commissioner from 2015 to 2021. She has devoted her life to children's rights, including running a charity supporting and protecting young people and working for Prime Ministers of different political parties. In recognition of her service, Baroness Longfield was elevated to the Lords earlier this year. At that point, she took the Labour whip, which on taking up this appointment, she will now resign. Alongside her, I can also announce her two fellow panellists. The first is Zoe Billingham, CBE. Zoe is a former inspector at His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and currently serves as chair of Norfolk and Suffolk NHS Foundation Trust. She brings deep expertise in safeguarding and policing, specifically in holding forces to account. The second panellist is Eleanor Kelly, CBE. Eleanor is the former Chief Executive of Southwark Council. In 2017, she supported the survivors of the London Bridge terrorist attacks and the victims of the Grenfell Tower fire of the same year. Together, the chair and panel bring deep experience of championing children's rights, knowledge of policing and local government, and crucially, a proven track record of holding powerful institutions to account. Each individual was recommended by Baroness Casey, and her recommendation follows recent engagement with victims. The first thing the chair and panel will do, alongside Baroness Casey, is meet with victims later this week. Today, we also published the draft terms of reference, which I will place in the Library of the House. Baroness Casey was clear this inquiry must be time-limited to ensure that justice is swift for those who have already waited too long. For that reason, it will be completed within 3 years, supported by a £65 million budget. The inquiry will be a series of local investigations overseen by a national panel with full statutory powers. Baroness Longfield has confirmed that Oldham will have a local investigation. The chair and panel will determine the other locations in due course, and no area will be able to resist a local investigation. These terms of reference are clear on a number of vital issues. The inquiry is focused specifically on child sexual abuse committed by grooming gangs. It will consider explicitly the background of offenders, including their ethnicity and religion, and whether the authorities failed to properly investigate what happened out of a misplaced desire to protect community cohesion. The inquiry will act without fear or favour, identifying individual, institutional and systemic failure, inadequate organisational responses and failures of leadership. It will also work hand in hand with the police. Where new criminality comes to light, be that by the perpetrators or those who covered up their crimes, the inquiry will pass evidence to law enforcement so they can take forward any further prosecutions and put more of these evil men behind bars. The inquiry must and will place victims and survivors at the forefront, with a charter setting out how they will participate and how their views, experiences and testimony will shape the inquiry's work. As I have said already, the terms are in draft form. The Chair will now consult on them with victims and other stakeholders, and they will be confirmed no later than March, when the inquiry can begin its work in earnest. Alongside launching this inquiry, Baroness Casey's audit contained a number of other recommendations, which the Government accepted in full. As the inquiry begins its work, we continue righting these wrongs. I can announce today that I have commissioned new research from UK Research and Innovation to rectify the unacceptable gaps in our understanding of perpetrators' backgrounds and motivations, including their ethnicity and religion. My predecessor wrote to all police forces calling on them to improve the collection of ethnicity data. And while the Home Secretary does not currently have the power to mandate that this is collected, I will rectify this by legislating at the earliest possible opportunity. The Department for Education is currently interrogating gaps in children in need data identified in the audit, which seems to underreport the scale of this crisis. My Right Honourable friend, the Education Secretary, will soon publish the findings of an urgent review of this data conducted by her department. Across government, the audit identified that poor data sharing continues to put children at risk. As a result, we are introducing a legal duty for information sharing between safeguarding partners. We are creating a unique identifier for each child, linking all data across government. And we are upgrading police technology to ensure data can be shared across agencies. The audit also identified an absurdity in our legal system that saw some child rapists convicted of lesser crimes. As a result, we are now changing the law to make clear that children cannot consent when they have been raped by an adult, and so perpetrators are charged for the hideous crime they have in fact committed. While the law has protected abusers from the consequences of their crimes, it has too often punished victims. Some survivors were convicted for crimes they had been coerced into, continuing their trauma to this day. We are already legislating in the Crime and Policing Bill to disregard offences related to prostitution. And the Ministry of Justice is now working with the Criminal Cases Review Commission to ensure that they are resourced to review applications from individuals who believe that they were wrongly criminalised. The national audit identified further weaknesses in relation to taxi licensing. Abusers were applying for licences in areas where controls were lax to circumvent protection put in place by local councils to tackle abuse. My Right Honourable friend, the Transport Secretary, will soon be legislating to close this dangerous loophole in the regulation of taxis. The audit was clear that justice has not been done. Baroness Casey requested that a new National Police investigation was required to bring offenders to justice. Last month, the National Crime Agency launched Operation Beacon Port, reviewing previously closed cases of child sexual exploitation. It has already flagged more than 1,200 cases for potential reinvestigation, more than 200 of which are high-priority cases of rape. The evil men who committed these crimes and thought they got away with it will find they have nowhere to hide. The audit finally called on the government to fund the delivery of its recommendations. Alongside investment in the inquiry itself, I can announce today that a further £3.65 million will be committed this year to the policing operation, survivor support and research into grooming gangs. This work, Madam Deputy Speaker, is essential. But without truth, there can be no justice. Today, I have announced the chair and panel of an inquiry which will shine a bright light on this dark moment in our history. They will do so alongside the victims of these awful crimes, who have waited too long to see justice done. This inquiry is theirs, not ours. So I call on all those present to put politics aside for a moment and to support this chair and her panel in the pursuit of truth and justice. And I commend this statement to the House.
Shadow Home Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Let us remember victims are at the heart of this. Young girls, some only 10 years old, were groomed and gang raped by men of mainly Pakistani origin. Girls like Jane, just 12 years old when she was raped by an illegal immigrant. When she was found by police, instead of arresting the rapist, they arrested Jane. Or Anna, only 15 years old, who repeatedly told social workers that she had been gang raped, but instead of helping her, they allowed her to marry her main abuser in an Islamic ceremony, attended by the very social worker who should have protected her. Last week, sentencing remarks were published from several of these terrible cases. I warn the House, some of these are extremely graphic. One perpetrator, Mohammed Karar, raped a 12-year-old girl, and when she tried to fight back, he hit her with a baseball bat and then inserted the handle into her vagina. He also injected her with heroin and forced her to take crack cocaine. Another man, Arshid Hussain, viciously beat a young girl, stubbed out a cigarette on her chest, tied her up, and she was then repeatedly raped by numerous different Asian men. The same man, Arshid Hussain, also called a victim who had been raped and abused since the age of just 7, quotes, white trash. He said that Asian girls would not do what he was forcing her to do. There was an explicit racial element to his crime. He was raping his victim because she was white. The identity of the majority of the perpetrators is something that should not be hidden. A 2020 study by academics at the universities of Southampton and Reading reviewed 498 grooming gang convictions. They found that 83% of the perpetrators were of Muslim background, mainly, specifically, of Pakistani heritage. The Casey report and the Telford report made similar observations. The fact is, these crimes were deliberately covered up by those in authority who were more interested in so-called community relations and in avoiding being called racist than they were in protecting young girls. I spoke to a retired police officer who was told by a serving chief superintendent to stop investigating abuse by Pakistani origin taxi drivers in Bradford because the local police did not want to offend Bradford's Muslim community. And I've sent the name of that officer to the police for investigation. A former Labour MP, Simon Danchuk, was even told by the then chair of the Parliamentary Labour Party to stop asking questions to avoid antagonising the Muslim community in his town. Yet when the need for a national inquiry into this was raised in January, the Prime Minister disgracefully smeared those calling for an inquiry as, quotes, far right. What the Prime Minister claimed was a far right bandwagon in January had become government policy by June. So will the Home Secretary please apologise on behalf of the Prime Minister for what he said last January? The truth is, this should not have taken several months and the threat of a vote in Parliament to agree to this inquiry in the first place, and it should not have taken another 6 months to appoint a chair. That is what the survivors and their families told me yesterday. One of the most disturbing elements of this scandal is the deliberate cover-up of these crimes, as I have said. So can the Home Secretary assure the House that those in authority who covered up these crimes will be prosecuted for the offence of misconduct in public office, and will she ensure the inquiry refers such cases to the police for investigation? Can she confirm the inquiry will formally start in March of 2026 and that the final report will be published publicly 3 years later in March 2029? We have not yet seen the terms of reference. Survivors and their families, who I met yesterday, are concerned the scope of this inquiry may be too broad. So will the Home Secretary confirm it will focus specifically on localised, group-based grooming gangs, and that it will analyse the ethnicity and religious background of the perpetrators? She mentions local inquiries sitting underneath the national inquiry. Can she also specifically confirm that those local inquiries will be completely independent of those bodies they are investigating, particularly independent of local councils and independent of local police forces? They can't be allowed to investigate themselves. Will the Home Secretary also confirm that parents of survivors and victims will be able to serve on the panel as well? I spoke yesterday to 2 parents of survivors who felt they'd been excluded from the previous panels. Madam Deputy Speaker, for many survivors and victims, the truth has been hidden for far too long. These crimes were covered up because those in authority were more concerned about so-called community relations and avoiding being called racist than they were about protecting young children. That was an abject moral failure. The truth, at last, must come out.
Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Shadow Secretary of State for his remarks. Let me just say, as he was reading out excerpts from some of the court transcripts that have been made public, I, like other members in the House, have read some of those transcripts, and they do make for truly horrifying reading, and they are a reminder, the starkest reminder of all perhaps, for everyone in this House and beyond, that it is absolutely essential that we all collectively do right by the victims who have had such unimaginable horrors inflicted upon them. And I hope that that is the spirit in which we will all be able to engage across this House as the inquiry gets up and running and continues its work. I also want to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I think this is a moment to elevate, now that we have a chair and panel in place, to elevate this discussion beyond our usual trade-offs of party politics across this dispatch box. The Shadow Secretary of State has a critique of the government. I will robustly defend the government of which I am a part. We have always been focused on the outcome of justice and truth for victims, less so the process itself, but it was this government that asked Baroness Casey to do her national audit. She followed the evidence and recommended this national inquiry, and that is what we are doing, and that is what we have supported. But now that we have a chair and a panel, I just think that this is a moment, if we're going to do right by the victims, who are a diverse cohort of people who will have different views and who will all feel, regardless of where they stand on this inquiry itself, some degree of anxiety about what will happen next, and will need some reassurance that we can rise above our usual political discourse and unite in support for the chair and panel as they do this important work. Let me say, for most of his detailed questions, the answer is a straightforward yes. So on scope, let me just reassure him there is no dilution of the scope, and it is very clearly focused on exactly the problem that was named by Baroness Casey in her national audit. To the extent that the inquiry finds evidence of any potential misconduct in public office or other breaches of the law, of course, they are working very closely with our partners in law enforcement. The whole point for having this inquiry is to make sure that there are actions that result from these investigations and that people are properly held to account, including by facing the full force of the law. I'm sure that once the inquiry reports, they will have other things to say, potentially even about strengthening the law as well. So I think it's important we let let the inquiry do their work, but they are not going to be held back from making any findings that lead to further investigations and accountability through the legal system. Let me also confirm to him on timings. March, the draft terms of reference will be confirmed no later than March. It could come a little earlier potentially, but up to three months for the draft terms of reference, and then up to 3 years for the inquiry to conclude, so no later than 2020, not March 29, with the report as well. And that is the timetable that the Chair and the panel members have signed up for. On the local investigations, of course it's right, they won't be investigating themselves. The work of the local investigation will be under the auspices of the Chair and her panel, and they will be making sure that those investigations are held by them to the standard that they will set and follow themselves, and they will also decide which other areas they wish to be included in these local investigations. And I'm sure members will want to make representations to them, but no area anywhere in England or Wales will be able to resist having a local investigation under the auspices of this inquiry, which of course has all of the statutory powers that you would expect such an inquiry to have. I think, Madam Deputy Speaker, I've dealt with all of the issues that the Shadow Secretary of State has raised, but I do look forward to, I hope, a more constructive dialogue between us as the inquiry gets underway.
Champion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, as you know, I've spent 13 years researching this most evil of crimes, so I don't know how or where to start, but let me boil it down to a couple of things. One, I still have no idea why those paid to protect children didn't do that, and so I hope the inquiry both finds that out and makes sure there is no way that happens again. Two, I believe the scale of this is in literally every town, every city, every village in the United Kingdom, and so I hope the inquiry and the NCA work is able to cover all of that. But then that brings me to my substantive, which is this is going to cost a lot of money. Every case you find will need to be an investigation, but equally local authorities will have to put child protection measures in place. In Rotherham, all of that money has come from the local authority. So can the Home Secretary assure us that our local authorities will have child protection money and our police forces will have the resources they need to get the prosecutions we have to see?
Secretary.
I thank my honourable friend, and I paid tribute to her long work exposing many of the issues herself in her own area that will now be the subject of the national inquiry. She's right, it is utterly shocking and defies comprehension that people whose only job was to look after vulnerable children failed in their duty to those children, and the inquiry will ensure that they face ultimate accountability for their failures. I hear the point about the inquiry covering every single area. There is no doubt that child abuse occurs in every part of the country. One of the recommendations that Baroness Casey made was that the inquiry should be time limited because so many of the victims and survivors have waited so long for a proper measure of justice in their cases, and she recognised that there is therefore a necessary trade-off between doing something that is time limited and being able to go to every single area. But I'm sure the inquiry, the Chair and the panel will engage constructively with members across this House to make sure they get to the right areas and can draw the lessons that will then lead to national recommendations. So even if the lessons come from a smaller cohort of areas, all of the recommendations will apply absolutely everywhere. And the government has already invested billions in child protection measures already in this Parliament, but I recognise the call she has made, and I'm sure that when the recommendations are made, the government will respond on money in due course.
Liberal Democrat spokesperson Max Wilkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The crimes that we've heard about are despicable and sickening. They were first reported in the press more than 20 years ago. The victims have already waited far too long for justice, so we welcome today's announcement. And we welcome other details in the statement, including reforms to ensure children cannot be considered to have consented to sexual activity with adults. The fact that that was the case is a shame on our nation. And we welcome moves to close loopholes in taxi licensing and the points made about data collection too. There are some questions that remain about this process. How will the government ensure the inquiry remains fully independent and free from political influence and pressures, regardless of those strong pressures that they will face, including from within this House, and that it runs to timetable? In light of the recent resignations from the previous panel, are ministers still in touch with those women to offer them the chance to rejoin this process now it is gaining some pace? Can the Home Secretary confirm what steps the inquiry will take to maintain the trust of the victims and their families? On the matter of the KC&J reviews, will she commit to implementing all of the previous recommendations from previous reports? Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, the national audit highlighted the incompleteness of data, but it was suggestive of concerning trends related to the modes of organisation and how those relate to the ethnicity, particularly in those areas where police were recording appropriate data. The Home Secretary rightly mentioned cohesion in her statement. How will this inquiry avoid stigmatising entire communities and undermining efforts to improve cohesion in this subject and in others adjacent, while thoroughly investigating the matter and ensuring that victims get the justice that they deserve?
I thank the Liberal Democrat spokesman for his remarks. Let me reassure him, I think the track records of the Chair and the two panel members speak for themselves. These are three women who have a long track record of holding public authorities to account. They've done so in the case of Baroness Longfield, the Chair, under different political parties. I think they have shown in their work that they are unafraid of whoever the political masters might be when it comes to holding either police forces, local authorities or other organisations to account. So I think we should take some encouragement from their track record, and I know that Baroness Casey recommended these individuals because of their track record and their deep experience in holding authorities to account, and I'm sure they will bring all of that experience to bear as they conduct the work of the National Inquiry now. As for the panel of victims and survivors, they've been written to by the Chair and the panel today. The particular panel that was set up in order to help get the inquiry going will now necessarily disband because the inquiry will now get up and running. However, the inquiry will itself have a victims charter that will set out the way that the inquiry will ensure that victims and survivors are at the heart of this process and they feel a sense of confidence and trust in the work that the inquiry is doing. On earlier recommendations from previous reports, he will know that we are commencing our work on all of the recommendations made by Baroness Casey in her national audit, and we continue our work in implementing the recommendations made by the ICSA inquiry, and there will be more announcements to come later this week and next on those, which I won't preempt in the debate today. And let me just say on avoiding stigmatising entire communities, I totally hear and understand the point that he is making. It's obviously of concern to many members, including myself, in this House. But let me say to him, in my experience, every community wants these people locked up, wants these individuals, these vile rapists, to face the full force of the law. And perhaps those who feel stigmatised by the behaviour of these criminals might even feel that more strongly than others. But I think it's in everyone's interest to make sure that we get to the truth, and there is never anything to be afraid of the truth. Once we've established truth, justice can take place, and we as a society can learn lessons for the future.
Jim McMahon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The announcement of the Chair panel terms of reference and timelines are welcome. Survivors have waited to engage in the formal process, and it's important for them and for others yet to come forward that it leaves no stone left unturned. It's not restricted by time, and it follows the evidence wherever it may lead. We've heard quite a lot about race, and that being an important characteristic of the form of abuse that we're talking about here, but can we not lose sight of class? Of course, the perpetrators were by and large Pakistani men, but the social workers were not, the police officers were not, and they had a view of these girls that I think absolutely determined how they were treated. But can I ask the Home Secretary to confirm that the National Inquiry format, together with deep dives, will ensure that cross-border offending, which transcended local authority and police boundaries, will be covered and not allowed to fall through the net?
Well, let me reassure my honourable friend, absolutely on the point he makes on cross-border offending, that will not be allowed to slip through the net, and that is something that the Chair and her panel members have already confirmed. Let me say also to him, he makes a really important point, which I think no one in this House should lose sight of as well, which was the view that many in society took of the girls that were raped and abused in this way. They were seen by many parts of society, and some in local authorities, some in policing, elsewhere as well, as essentially white trash, that these girls were somehow not really children, that they were making decisions as if they were in control of their lives, that they were not victims of coercion and serious abuse. And that is why I think this process is so essential, so that that moment of reckoning that is required because of this shocking scandal is true and fair to the victims in every way. So both the criminal justice response that goes after the vile perpetrators of the crime, but also to those in our state institutions that thoroughly let these women, these girls down.
Chair of the Home Affairs Committee, Dame Karen Bradley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Home Secretary for her statement and welcome the appointment of the Noble Baroness Longfield as Chair of the panel. She is has a great track record, and I've worked with her myself over many years, and I'm sure will do a very thorough job. I'm also very grateful that victims are being put at the centre of this inquiry. This is about the victims. We cannot forget the terrible suffering that they've had, and they must be front and centre of everything that is done by the inquiry. But can I ask the Home Secretary around what will happen if during one of the local inquiries some new evidence or new issue arises? Will it be possible to go back and look at previous inquiries? Will it be possible to even go back and look at those inquiries that have already completed locally, but where perhaps certain issues were not identified that do come along as part of this work?
Well, let me thank the Chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee for her comments and her question. Let me assure her victims and survivors will be at the heart of the inquiry. That is clear in the draft terms of reference, and the fact that there will be a charter that the Chair and the panel will create, I think, will give some comfort to victims and survivors as to how they will be able to inform the work of the inquiry, and also give them some comfort about the trust and confidence that they can place in the process as well, both of which I think are very much necessary. In terms of evidence, in the end, the inquiry has to go where the evidence takes them. What I am sure of is that they have the freedom to pursue that evidence wherever it may lead, and then make their recommendations. That could mean new criminal cases are pursued. It could mean other action against public authority figures. It could mean that there are gaps in the law that need to be filled as well. But what I am sure is that the draft terms of reference, and they will be consulted on, and if people feel they need to be strengthened, I'm sure they can engage with the Chair and the panel to do so. There will be a period of consultation now, but the intention is to make sure that this inquiry does the job that should have always been done, which is make sure that the criminal justice system is fit for purpose, but that there is accountability for everyone else who let these girls down.
Paul Wall.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I strongly welcome the appointment of Anne Longfield as the chair of this new independent inquiry into grooming gangs. The key is to find the facts and follow the evidence wherever it leads, as you just said. During the trial of some of the Rochdale child rapists earlier this year, the prosecution said that the abuse of the girls took place, and I quote, under the noses of social workers and others who should have done far more to protect them. Does the Home Secretary agree that we need to hold to account anyone who ignored these crimes, and that no council, no police officer, no social worker, no racial group should ever be exempt from the scrutiny of this new inquiry?
My honourable friend is absolutely right, and I strongly endorse every point that he has just made. There will be no place to hide for those who hurt these girls and those who let them down and allowed them to be hurt. And it is important that this inquiry finally provides us, all of us as a country, with the answers that we need, so that we can learn those lessons, bring a measure of justice to the victims in this case, and make sure that this never happens again.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
The Home Secretary knows that I admire her personally, and she's a devout Muslim lady, and I share many of her values. I think she's uniquely well placed to comment on this and to explain and give confidence that what is it about these Muslim men that they felt they could behave in this way, and can she explain that this is a if it is, a very small minority. Can she see what I'm trying to get at? That she can actually approach this in a way and can explain this in a way that some of us can't, because nobody can ever accuse her of being racist, and nobody can ever accuse her of not wanting to get to the truth of this.
Well, I thank the Father of the House for his question. It's difficult to find yourself as a spokesperson for billions of people around the world. But let me say to him, as a personal perspective, and based on my own constituency experience, that of my family, my friends, the community that I belong to back home in Birmingham, there is nothing Muslim or Islamic about the acts that these evil men have perpetrated. It is not behaviour that any of us would accept or tolerate. All of these things are crimes. And I don't know anybody that doesn't believe that these people should be locked up for a very, very long time. And I also know about the anxiety, the fear that members of this particular faith minority community that I belong to feel when these are the stories that are in the news, because they feel that that is a collective view that is then taken of the whole community. It's why I made the point in my speech about making sure that we go after the perpetrators of these evil crimes and that we do not allow the behaviour of this minority to affect the way that we relate to the rest of the law-abiding citizens of this community in our country. We are very lucky to live in a very diverse country. We largely do a good job of holding all of the different peoples of our country together. It does mean that we should always pursue justice without fear or favour, because in the end that is the only way to maintain confidence in our system of justice, but also to make sure that we don't inadvertently harm community relations, which is what I think has happened because of the actions of those who looked the other way when these crimes were being committed.
Anna Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd just like to commend the Home Secretary for the tone in which she has approached this very sensitive subject. I met with victims and survivors in West Yorkshire, including representatives of the Bradford Survivor Leadership Group, brought together by West Yorkshire Mayor Tracy Brabin and the Deputy Mayor and Police and Crime Commissioner Alison Lowe. Those victims and survivors told the gathered group of MPs that they wanted action. They were very clear that they wanted to make sure there was implementation of past inquiries, and I'm glad that this government has wasted no time in implementing the J review and, as the Home Secretary has confirmed today, the other recommendations in cases national audit. The second thing they said was that they wanted us to learn from good practice. And I would commend that the incoming chair, Baroness Longfield, looks at some of what West Yorkshire Police are doing. Operation Dale's Way has made convictions since 2016 of many defendants with over 2,000 years of imprisonment. And the third and final thing, Madam Deputy Chair, is ongoing engagement. So I would just like to invite Baroness Longfield to come and listen to the victims and survivors in Bradford and West Yorkshire. Thank you.
Well, let me thank my honourable friend. I'm sure that the Chair and her panel have heard the request made of the visit to her area. She'll understand I won't speak for the Chair and the panel members, but I know that members across this House will want to make representations about their local areas, and I'm sure all of that will be taken under consideration. My honourable friend will know that Baroness Longfield in particular knows Bradford well, having gone in to help turn around children's services in that local authority in relation to a different matter, but she does know the area well, and I do recognise that there are already some improvements that have been made by her local police as well, and some lessons have already been learned. It's important that whilst the inquiry will make recommendations in the future about things that we need to do at national level to learn the lessons to make sure such criminality cannot take place again, the good practice that we already have should still be shared with authorities all over the country, and I will be talking to Baroness Longfield about how we make sure we don't lose current good practice whilst we wait for the final recommendations of the inquiry.
Wilson.
Deputy Speaker, I welcome the Home Secretary's statement today, and I welcome the appointment of Baroness Longfield, who I think will be an excellent chair. When I met Professor Jay at the start of the year about her inquiry, there were two things she impressed upon me: the importance of a Child Protection Authority and the importance of data sharing. The Safeguarding Minister announced the establishment of a Child Protection Authority earlier this year. Will the Home Secretary update the House on progress in establishing that authority? And on data sharing, we on these benches have supported the government in their legislation to create a single unique identifier. Unfortunately, there are people outside this place who are suggesting it's the precursor to digital ID for children and that government will inappropriately use children's data. Will she reassure parents and carers out there that government will guard children's data with the utmost security and only use it to keep children safe and improve services for them?
Well, let me thank the Honourable Lady, and absolutely on her second point, this data is to keep children safe, and we have a duty to children in our country, and the recommendation on data sharing was well made and absolutely the right thing to do. The unique identifier is there as a measure of child safety and not for anything else, so let me provide her with that reassurance. I think some people have maybe legitimate concerns in this area and need that reassurance. I think others are seeking to make some mischief, but whatever it may be, I can confirm that the unique identifier is there as a child protection measure and a child protection measure alone. And then on the Child Protection Authority, she is tempting me to, because some future announcements that are imminent, I won't do so, but let me assure her that there will be a progress update very, very soon.
Chris Murray.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome this significant set of announcements from the Home Secretary and the strong panel members appointed. The Home Secretary will be aware that the Scottish Government has finally announced a review of grooming gangs in Scotland. The Chair, Alexis Jay, has said Scotland does not grasp the scale of child sexual exploitation. I know from my own previous experience working preventing trafficking that children are trafficked between Scotland and the rest of the UK for abuse. So can the Home Secretary confirm that this inquiry will liaise and collaborate with colleagues in Scotland, and Home Office officials will do what is needed to support it? Abusers work across the border, and so we must as well.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. The matters pertaining to local authorities and police forces are, of course, necessarily devolved matters, and so a large part of the inquiry is therefore necessarily only on devolved territory, but it will make national recommendations, and I do note the work that is now happening in Scotland in relation to grooming gangs, and again, I'm sure the Chair and the panel will make sure that there is some discussion whilst respecting the boundaries of devolution, but where there is best practice to be shared, or of course we know that this criminality does not respect borders, that is very much taken into account.
Mark Pritchard.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the Home Secretary's statement today, and also associate myself with her reply to the father of the House. And it's absolutely right, no community, whether ethnic or religious, should be stigmatised as a whole. But she mentioned in a statement British Asian. Can I say that some of my British Asian Hindu, British Asian Sikh community are rather fed up of both media and in this place a generic British Asian remarks and statements being made, and I hope that the inquiry will be more definitive and descriptive, and she mentioned religion in her own statement. Telford and Wrekin, she will know, had its own local inquiry, the Tom Crowther inquiry. Her predecessor said that there were still, to paraphrase, gaps to be filled since that inquiry. Will she support me in calling for the national inquiry to come back to Telford and Wrekin to ensure that everything that needs to be done is being done? And finally, Madam Deputy Speaker, she mentions a 3-year timetable taking us to March 2029. If the election, she may be the Labour leader by then, is in May 2029, and prorogation is in March 2029, will she commit to the victims and to this House and to all of our constituents that the inquiry will report, even if there is a general election in 2029?
I thank the honourable member for his questions. Let me say I've heard much the same complaint from Asian men in my own constituency who are not Muslim or of Pakistani heritage but are of different Asian heritage, that the confusion in the descriptions, they feel also, stigmatises a wider group of people. I think we should all just agree we should not be stigmatising innocent people and law-abiding citizens in our country, no matter who they are. because that is absolutely wrong in every way. We should go after the criminals who have committed these atrocious crimes, and the best way in the end to resolve these matters is just to have accurate ethnicity data that is collected. That was the gap that Baroness Casey found in her national audit. It is a gap that has existed for many years. It is a gap that I intend to put right. As I said in my statement, the Home Secretary does not in fact have the power to mandate the collection of good quality ethnicity data. I will legislate in order to change that and make sure that every Home Secretary in future has that power. And it is my own view that we should collect ethnicity data for all offences, because actually the best way to deal with suggestions of conspiracy or people thinking that some communities are allowed to get away with certain types of behaviour, or that the state doesn't wish to know all the full facts of any cases, to just put all of those allegations, claims, counterclaims to bed. The best thing we can do is have the transparency of accurate data, and that is how we will seek to proceed as a government. Let me say to Mount Alford, I very much hear the case he has made. I will resist the temptation to tell the chair and the panel where they should go. Where they will go for their local investigations is a matter for them, and they will set out the criteria by which they will make that decision themselves in accordance with the draft terms of reference. But he has made his case powerfully. I'm sure that will have been heard by the chair and the panel members. And let me say to him, you know, the 3-year timetable, we have followed the recommendation of Baroness Casey very closely, and she said 3 years is the right amount of time to both do a good job, get the work done, and make those recommendations. And nothing, not even a general election, should get in the way of that.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I welcome the appointment of Baroness Longfield and the two panellists to this inquiry? And can I just ask, particularly for victims and survivors, the Home Secretary has mentioned that they will be at the heart of the inquiry. Can she set out a little bit more about what that participation looks like? And just on the potential reinvestigation of 1,200 cases, which is really important, we must make sure that happens. But we already know too many victims and survivors are facing unacceptable court delays. So what discussions is she having with colleagues at the Ministry of Justice to make sure that progress happens at pace? Thank you.
She's absolutely right about the need for victims and survivors to be at the heart of this process. That is very clear from the draft terms of reference. To begin with, the chair and the panel, alongside Baroness Casey, will meet with the current victims and survivors panel who've been involved in getting this inquiry set up and get it running. And they will then also create the charter which will set the framework by which the inquiry will ensure that victims and survivors are at the heart of this inquiry, and to give those victims and survivors the confidence and trust in the process that they rightfully ask for and need. And I'm sure that the chair will be very strong in putting this across. And let me also say to her, I used to be the Lord Chancellor and Secretary of State for Justice. I know the issues of delays in the criminal justice system across the board very well, and we are working very closely with our colleagues in the Ministry of Justice to ensure that that old adage, justice delayed is justice denied, does not come true for these victims.
Robbie Moore.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I do have an urgent plea for the Home Secretary and the new chair, Baroness Longfield, who I know will be watching today. They will both know that, shockingly, Keighley and the wider Bradford district have never had a full independent inquiry, despite Anne Cryer raising the alarm more than 20 years ago. Madam Deputy Speaker, myself, leading child abuse solicitor David Greenwood, local survivor Fiona Goddard, supported by more than 5,000 local residents, have written to the new incoming chair, urging her to immediately launch a targeted inquiry across Keighley and the wider Bradford district. So can the Home Secretary ensure that Baroness Longfield sees our letter, understands the overwhelming public will across Keighley for this issue, and meets with Fiona, David and myself at the earliest opportunity so that we can ensure that Bradford district is at the heart of this national inquiry?
Secretary.
Let me thank the Honourable Member for his contribution, and he's made a very strong and very powerful case for the inclusion of Bradford and Keighley into the inquiry as one of the local areas for a local investigation. I hope he'll understand why I won't make commitments on behalf of Baroness Longfield today, but I know that she will see this debate, she will hear all of these representations, and Baroness Longfield and the panel members will very soon set out the criteria by which they will make these decisions about where they will go for local investigations. And I know that she and the panel members will want to engage with members in this House, and I hope that he will take some reassurance from that, but I know he's a doughty campaigner from his local area, and I'm sure that those representations will be heard.
Sam Carling.
Speaker, and can I also hugely welcome the appointment today of the Chair and panel members, all of whom are brilliant appointments who I know will do a very thorough job. I'm very pleased to see in the terms of reference to religion. The previous inquiry, ICSA, unveiled serious problems in religious groups of many different faiths, many of which also operate as charities. Can the Secretary of State outline what progress the government has already made on implementing recommendations from that previous inquiry? And will she also ask the relevant minister to meet with me to discuss strengthening charity regulations so that any religious organisations operating as charities that are found to have played a part in this can face action?
Home Secretary.
I thank my honourable friend. I believe that he's already met the Minister for Safeguarding, but she has just told me she's very happy to meet with him again. So I'm sure that meeting will take place as quickly as possible. He will know that we are pressing ahead with implementation of the ICSA recommendations as well as the KC audit recommendations as well. If there are any gaps, we will of course seek to fill them. But the first thing is, I think, to meet the test of the recommendations that have already been made. But I look forward to discussing these further with him in due course.
Sarah Pochin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. We at Reform UK welcome the progress announced today by the Home Secretary into this long overdue inquiry, and welcome the reassurance she's given that the victims of predominantly British Pakistani rape gangs will be properly consulted and involved in the inquiry. But can she confirm that her Safeguardings Minister will be called as a witness in this inquiry, as someone who was voted against an inquiry earlier this year and in whom victims lost all confidence?
I'll be happy to give over to
Well, firstly, the Minister for Safeguarding will happily talk to anyone, anywhere, under any auspices about the need for justice for victims and survivors of these heinous crimes. Let me just say to the Honourable Lady, I hope the House can elevate beyond party political point scoring, because the most important thing here is to deliver the measure of justice that is needed for the victims and survivors of these horrific crimes. They will be at the heart of this inquiry, and the inquiry will go wherever the evidence takes it.
Catherine Atkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Home Secretary's focus on victims and survivors and her commitment that they will remain at the forefront of the inquiry's approach. But can she also ensure that the findings and recommendations of previous inquiries and investigations are also implemented, so that the voices of victims who have already shared their horrific stories are never forgotten?
Secretary.
Let me absolutely give her that reassurance, and I hope that the progress the government is making on implementing previous recommendations gives her and others some more of that reassurance. In the end, I think we prove ourselves to victims and survivors here by doing and by taking the action that is so desperately needed, both from older recommendations and also from the new ones that will come.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Very few of us here today were present in 2003, when the then MP for Keighley, Mrs Anne Cryer, a courageous Labour member on the left of her party, spoke out about these grooming gangs. For her troubles, she was smeared as a racist, she was shunned, and she was threatened to the point at which she had to have safety devices and emergency alarms installed in her home. Will the Home Secretary join with me in paying tribute to her courage, belatedly? It has never received any recognition of which I'm aware, And does she not think that Anne Cryer might even now have some insights to share with an inquiry as to what it's like when the people who are supposed to be protecting people close ranks to protect the offenders instead?
Home Secretary.
Well, let me right the wrong immediately in terms of Anne not having the recognition that she deserves, and let me pay fulsome tribute to the work that she did in exposing these, not just the crimes themselves, but also the state failure that meant that so many people who are supposed to keep young girls safe were looking the other way. He's absolutely right. It took immense courage for Anne to speak out all those years ago, and she has herself deep experience and expertise here, which I'm sure that Baroness Longfield and others will want to avail themselves of. It can be a lonely road when you're exposing this kind of criminality, but also when you're holding to account other parts of the state that might not want to face up to what they have done. She walked that lonely road, and we're only here today with the knowledge that we have because of the work she started.
Luke Meyer.
Madam Deputy Speaker, there's a concerning tendency, I think, to view these issues as historic when, in all likelihood, there are working class children being failed by institutions right now all across our country. And so can the Home Secretary confirm that the inquiry will be able to respond to new information as it comes forward? And in terms of the behaviour of institutions, can the Home Secretary confirm that the inquiry will be able to account for that as well, and actionable, clear recommendations will be included to stop these failings happening again?
Home Secretary.
Let me say yes to him on both of those counts and give him that reassurance that he has sought. Is absolutely the case that as new information or evidence comes to light, the inquiry will be able to pursue that and will work very closely with law enforcement and others to make sure that that happens. He is right. Sadly, devastatingly, it is undoubtedly the case that working class children are once again today being let down and being hurt because those who should have kept them safe are not keeping them safe. And that is why this government will never stop in the work that we're doing across government to keep the children of our country safe.
Will Forster.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Home Secretary's statement and the progress on this inquiry. My local authority, Surrey County Council, has at best been slow to acknowledge their failures in child abuse and child safeguarding in terms of the case of Zara Sharif from Woking. How will the government ensure that both police forces and local authorities fully cooperate with this inquiry, particularly in areas with a history of underreporting, cover-up and a lack of openness and transparency?
Home Secretary.
Well, let me say to him first that no local authority, whoever they are, will be able to resist a local investigation if that is what the chair and the panellists wish to occur. And once they are underway with their local investigations, they will in the end make national level findings and recommendations which the government will then respond to. So I would envisage that in the end, whether an area is part of a local investigation or not, every area across England and Wales will have lessons to learn and legal duties that they will have to fulfil. And I am sure that once the inquiry is reported, there will be potentially further legislation or other action that will be taken.
Chris Vince.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Secretary of State for her statement today. I particularly welcome the part about closing the loophole with regards to taxi regulations. In my first outing in this place, I spoke about the challenges and the problems caused by the loophole of cross-border hiring. Can I ask the Secretary of State to work at pace with her colleagues in the Department of Transport, I see one on the front bench now, to ensure that this legislation gets through and those people that are using taxis across the country feel safe?
Well, firstly, let me pay tribute to my honourable friend and the work that he has done on taxi regulation. And I would happily make sure that we keep discussing with him the measures that we are bringing forward. And let me provide him with the reassurance that we are working very closely with our colleagues in the Transport Department to make sure that the legislation in the English Devolution Bill is absolutely fit for purpose and does exactly what he and I would want it to do.
John Lamont.
Very much. The Scottish Government have announced a review of the Grooming Gangs evidence in Scotland, but this falls short of a full inquiry and disappoints many of the victims. Now, I've asked for this before, but please, will this UK Government extend its inquiry to the whole of the UK so that the victims of these appalling crimes get the justice that they deserve? Grooming gangs operate in all parts of the UK, so should this inquiry.
Home Secretary.
Well, look, I hear the absolute force with which the point is made, and I have a lot of sympathy with what the honourable member has said and what my own colleagues from Scotland have said in relation to the fact that grooming gangs do not respect boundaries, and that is a point I know that the inquiry chair and panel will also take on board. Many of the public authorities that have failed children sit within devolved departments, and so this is necessarily an England and Wales inquiry primarily, but I would expect there to be discussions with colleagues in the Scottish Government and to make sure that all of the lessons are learnt across the whole of the United Kingdom, because in the end, these are all our children and we all have a responsibility to keep them safe.
Dr. Scott Arthur.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I do thank the Secretary of State for her statement, and also the Minister for Safeguarding for the work she's done in this area over many years. What should shame us is that so many people have waited for many years for the announcement we've heard today. And I think, as I think the member for New Forest East hinted, some MPs were actually born after some of these offences took place. And it's an absolute disgrace that it's taken so long to get to this place. And it does come a week after, as we've heard, that the Scottish Government have been shamed into considering their own inquiry. And I do use that word, shamed, deliberately. But can I ask the Secretary of State, £65 million is a lot of money, but is it enough? Will more be made available if needed? And how will she keep herself updated and us here in this chamber updated on the progress of the inquiry, particularly the perspective of those survivors?
I thank my honourable friend. Look, it's an independent inquiry, so I think that there should be and there will be some necessary limits in my engagement with the chair and the panel, because it's an independent inquiry. They will go wherever the evidence takes them. I'm sure I will receive updates in terms of timescale and making sure that we are within the 3 years that has been agreed as the timescale for this inquiry. Let me reassure him, I'm sure that the correct level of resources are being made available to ensure that the inquiry can undertake its incredibly important work. And just look, I hear the point on devolution. I won't repeat the earlier answers that I have given, but I hope that given the subject matter and the fact that it should be of interest to all members in this House, regardless of which part of the United Kingdom we come from, that we are all doing everything we can to keep children in our country safe, that these lessons are learnt across the board by everyone.
Joshua Reynolds.
Madam Deputy Speaker, can I ask the Home Secretary what steps the Government are going to take across government to ensure that whilst this inquiry is ongoing, the victims of these horrible crimes are being given proper support whilst this process is undergoing?
Home Secretary.
Yes, let me provide him with that reassurance. Firstly, because Operation Beacon Port is up and running, and that is the National Crime Agency work to bring what have been closed cases to take a fresh look and bring more perpetrators to justice. Separately also, once the inquiry is up and running, there will be a victims charter which will set out the way in which the inquiry will engage with victims and survivors to give them the trust and confidence that they need and deserve.
Rupert Lowe.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As the Minister may know, we've been running our own independent inquiry into the rape gang scandal, funded by over 20,000 concerned people. Our hearings are taking place in early February next year. We've made immense progress to date, with more to come. Will the Home Secretary meet with me to discuss how our work could potentially assist the national inquiry, which we all want and need to succeed without further delay, as the rapes are continuing today?
Well, let me say to him, there is only one statutory inquiry, and that is the one that this government has initiated, for the chair and panel of which I have announced today. Let me also encourage, if he has collected evidence under his own auspices that is relevant to either current or past criminal proceedings or other evidence of state failure, he should make that available to the statutory inquiry.
Presentation of Bill Munira Wilson.